Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Indiana Jones review. That's right, I'm going to keep my promise and talk about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So obviously Raiders of the Lost Ark was an enormous hit with audiences and was a box office success, making $389.9 million. It had been decided, after all, that if Indy was a hit, then Spielberg wanted to turn this into a franchise. So the question is obviously, where do you take this story after the action-packed thrill ride we just had? And apparently into the past? That's right. For anyone who wasn't aware of this, the Temple of Doom is actually a prequel being set in 1935, whereas if you remember, Raiders was set in 1936. So only 1 year, but still. The film opens up in Shanghai 1935 with a musical number of Anything Goes. I love this scene. It's quite bizarre, but everything about it is so different to the opening we got in the previous film, and it's just full of glitz and glamour. I think that the scene really grabs your attention right from the outset and puts you into that headspace of being ready to enjoy the adventure that follows. Now, I know that the Chinese isn't very well spoken in the song, or at least that's what I hear online, because I'm going to be honest here, I don't speak a single word of it. But you know what? I don't care because it's still fun and you can tell a lot of effort has gone into it. The costumes are amazing and really help put you into the glamorous upper class world of the 30s. This is obviously where we are introduced to Willie Scott, but we're not fully aware of just the type of person she is. Indy is then given a reveal, and it's much more of an early James Bond type intro. I don't love it as much as the last film, but it still really works well, and I'm glad they went with something different. It's also soon in on this moment when Indy is poisoned and the scene is full of intensity thanks to the music as well as Harrison Ford's performance. Then before you know it, the film breaks into a massive fight and we get that good old action that we loved from before. After this scene, Indy has to escape and we're introduced to the one and only Short Round. The three main characters soon make their way to a plane, but leading up to this point we get lots of well-written comedy, which is a big part of what makes this film such a fun and enjoyable watch. Once they get onto the plane, we're then thrown into some more action when Indy has to try and land the plane, as the pilots just ditch them. Obviously, Indy doesn't manage to land the plane, which once again is what makes him such a good and much more relatable character, because he's not completely perfect at absolutely everything. So they end up in India, where after coming across a village in desperate poverty, Indy is asked to retrieve the sacred stone that will maintain peace over the village. First of all, I need to mention how much I love the characters of this film, and I will go ahead and say that I love them even more than the characters in Raiders, simply because of the impression that they've left on me. Short Round, or Shorty, is one of those characters who you just can't help but love. He clearly wants to be like Indy and is almost like his son, with the way he behaves towards him. One thing he does constantly is insist on everyone calling Indy Dr. Jones. This is a joke that's funny, but it's also clear it comes from Shorty having so much admiration for Indy. Whenever he's on screen, it's always funny because he'll just openly laugh at everything, especially when Willie is upset or aggravated by having to deal with nature. The general dynamic between him and Indy is one I love seeing on screen, and I just kind of wish they had brought him back for another adventure. Willie is a lot of fun in every scene. You might just look at her and think damsel in distress, but in reality it's clear they just made her the exact opposite of Marion. But she does ever so slightly grow in the film as a person, becoming less distressed by everything, and I think she has a bit more care for what's important, rather than, as she puts it, riding around in limousines. When Indy has to deal with her constant screaming, it's very entertaining to watch, as well as when she's forced into horrible scenarios that she has to go through with because it's a life or death situation. Out of the three female leads we had in the original trilogy, I think I would say she's my favourite, and again I just can't help but wish they had maybe shown more of her later on. I also think Indy himself is well built upon in this film. He's shown often having more of a sense of humour in this, and I think when he's trapped with two other people, it results in him behaving in a way that can be far more comedic and entertaining, but also shows a lot more of who he is as opposed to in the previous film, where he was often alone or only with people similar to him that he already knew. Overall, this film makes me like Indy a lot more than I already had, and that's saying something. In general, this film's plot is much more simple and straightforward than Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it could just be me, but that's something I often favour. I enjoy that this film is pretty much all in one place because it means that you can follow everything much closer than before. We don't need to be travelling to 4 different locations to tell a story that's compelling. I love how it's very simple because the 3 travel to the palace and are just there for the rest of the film. But the palace is interesting enough that you never think about the fact we've not moved on to somewhere else. Across the board, I enjoy films with simple plots because it means you can often learn more about the characters themselves rather than just the tasks they need to complete. It takes me back to why I really enjoyed Dread, because that film had the most simplistic, bare bones plot and was all in one location, but it had some awesome action and you got to learn more about the people and not the goal they needed to achieve. The performances are all standout. Harrison Ford was terrific in the first film, and in my opinion is even better here because he just generally seems to be more charismatic than last time. Ke Huy Quan made his breakthrough performance in this film, and it's very clear why he became such a big star, and I think the fact he got on so well with Harrison Ford resulted in his performance being so full of life and generally entertaining. Kate Capshaw is brilliant as Willie. She makes the film so entertaining because of how terrified she portrays Willie as being. The score, which I failed to mention in my last review, is simply perfection. John Williams really is a master at composing, and he did a damn good job coming straight out of Star Wars. He just manages to bring so much life into every scene, and the film simply wouldn't work half as well without him. One other standout scene is the one where Indy and Shorty are trapped in a pit full of bugs and insects, which Willie is forced to save them from. The scene has tension, it's creepy and also funny. Willie really has to push through and overcome her fears in this scene, proving why she is at the end of the day a good person, because she doesn't just leave them to die like you might expect her to. Another thing that made this scene work was the fact that the bugs were all real. This was made in 1984, so you couldn't computer generate a bunch of random fake looking bugs, which is a major criticism I have over the new film. I also love the scene of the 3 making their way to the palace and the group of birds being revealed as giant vampire bats. It's a really fun beginning into the type of film we're about to witness. I don't think anyone's watched this film without the banquet scene staying with them. In the scene it begins by appearing as though a delicious set of finely prepared meals will be brought to the table, but instead it's a bunch of hideous bugs and insects all laid out in front of them. There are stag beetles. One thing that I remember vividly is the snake that's cut open and full of little snakes. But of course there are the monkey heads with the brain ready inside to be eaten. The scene is brought together by the disturbing and fairly realistic effects. I can't really talk enough about how good the comedy with Willie is, with excellently read lines from Harrison Ford such as, "You're insulting them and embarrassing me," or when they both tell each other that they'll be back in 5 minutes. I just think the comedy is what helps balance out the film because it's so extreme at one point, such as when a heart is being ripped out of someone's chest with them remaining alive, to Indy telling Shorty to stop fooling around with that kid. There are so many great scenes, such as when Indy has to chop the bridge in half to escape. That scene works on so many levels because the horrible fate adds in a lot of tension, but Harrison Ford's delivery is so well done, particularly when he says, "In hell." That line is mainly what I remember him saying, simply due to how overly clear it is, making it slightly funny. The mine rail scene is an excellent example of special effects, with the red lighting and fog along with the fighting as they're moving along. Everything just adds an element of excitement, which is mainly what you want from an Indiana Jones film. The film plays some nice nods to Raiders, obviously with the snakes, but also with Indy going to pull out his gun and finding he's out of bullets, so ending up having to actually get into a sword fight instead. I just like that the scene gives you what you were initially expecting in Raiders, but completely going against what you were expecting this time around, and it helps to keep everything fresh, which is what I think works so well with making this film stand out from the rest. A lot of people have pointed out how much darker this film is than the previous, and it's pretty much been revealed that George Lucas and Spielberg were going through very messy breakups, so they probably did feel that they were getting their hearts ripped out of their chests and allowed it to change the script. Unfortunately, this film really didn't get great reception from most audiences, so they obviously went on to make the sequels closer in tone to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but in my opinion, ever so slightly worse. One big issue was with the rating, because this film was simply rated PG, and PG-13 didn't exist at the time. It just went straight from PG to R, so Spielberg suggested that they add in a new rating to bridge the gap, so parents knew more about what they were in for, and for that, it is in some ways quite an important film. This is without a doubt my favourite Indiana Jones film in the franchise, and it's the one that I can watch again and again and again. I understand why some people might not be too big a fan of it in comparison to Raiders, but I just think this film took everything great about the previous and elevated it. I really like how much simpler the plot is, because you don't need Indy to go into several different locations. You don't need to re-show him teaching. I don't want to see him again going up against Nazis, because it's already been done. And this is a smaller adventure that's much more original. The same rule still applies from the first, which is that this film works really well as a piece of escapism. I'd say possibly more so than the original, and I love the mid-30s setting along with the slightly gritty, realistic atmosphere you get from the way it's been shot with film. The way that the characters' clothes are fairly ruined by the end of it proves how much of a horrific adventure they've been on, so you can actually believe in this adventure. I think most people have seen it, but if you happen to be one of the rare few who haven't, then do yourself a favour and check it out.
From Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.